Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about human behavior, individual level behavior, and we'll get into some issues of culture a little bit, and we'll tease out more of that next time. But I do want to say a few words just to start off with about what we talked about last Thursday. So we talked about what sociology is, we talked a little bit about how to kind of do sociology. That is, what kinds of questions sociologists ask. We talked about the distinction between empirical questions that sociologists ask, which are questions about what exists in the world, and we distinguish that from philosophical questions, which are questions about what should exist in the world. How should we organize our world? And both matter, and we can debate both, but it's important to distinguish them so that we know what we're debating with each other. And then we went into several methods that sociologists use to get at empirical questions. So sociologists are asking empirical questions, and we use social science research methods as a means to get answers to those questions. And this is what your writing exercise was all about. And I knew it was going to be difficult because I'm asking you to do something that you may not have done before. I wanted you to ask a sociological question and try to think about what methods we could use to answer that. And remember, we've talked about three basic methods here: the experiment, surveys, and ethnographies. And those are the kind of basic tools that sociologists have. So I knew this was going to be difficult, and it's important to do these kind of difficult tasks to really push yourself. So we'll see how you did with that. So what we're going to do for the rest of the kind of first third of our course together, we're going to focus on explaining individual level behavior. And we're going to try as sociologists to provide a kind of social context or a social reality through which we can make sense of individual level behavior. Individuals don't merely do whatever they want, but their behavior is sort of filtered through culture and through what we'll call social structure. And so that's what we'll be teasing out for the next week or so. And just in case you're interested, a lot of this comes from a branch of sociology called social psychology, which focuses on explaining and understanding individual behavior. We have courses in our department on social psychology, so that if this really interests you, that may be something interesting to look into in the future. Why don't we get into answering and thinking about this question? How can we explain human behavior? I'm going to lay out today three basic principles of human behavior. And I want you to know that I'm going to lay out these three principles of behavior to start off, and then when we meet in class on Tuesday, we will sort of tease out two additional principles. But for now, we're going to stick with these three principles of human behavior. The first is that behavior is patterned and ordered. That is to say, it's not random. It's not chaotic. It has a kind of flow to it, a kind of order to it. That is, if you were an alien coming down to our planet and you looked at what was going on, you would not see essentially chaos. You would see patterns of behavior that give an order to the life and to what's going on there. And that is because we tend to, in a particular social context, in a society and in a social context within a society, we tend to behave in similar ways. When we're faced with similar social situations, people in a given society tend to act in a particular way. Right? So in particular times and places, people tend to do the same thing. There's some variance, of course, but in general, and we'll try to point out in the ways in which we generally do behave in similar ways. So why do we behave in these particularly ordered and similar fashions? This is because most behavior is guided by a set of norms, or what we can think of as rules governing that behavior. Right? So when sociologists talk about norms, that's a particular sociological term. So I want to take a few minutes to kind of tease out what we mean by social norms. A norm is any standard or rule that tells people how to act in a specific situation or setting. So imagine yourself in a particular, it's unique to a particular situation. We'll talk about the classroom as a social situation in which there are particular norms governing what's going on. You can think about things like eating meals together as a social situation in which there are rules that tell us what we should and should not be doing, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And we judge others and are judged by these particular norms, by whether or not we follow these particular norms. So these are kind of like guideposts that tell us how to act in particular places at particular times. It provides essentially a script that's going to tell us what we should and should not be doing, saying, and so forth in a particular social situation. And this provides then a set of rules to help us act in a particular way, but also a set of expectations for others, right? People can begin to expect others to behave in particular ways in a given social setting. So we have behavior that's patterned and ordered. It's ordered by this set of norms or rules that tell us what we should and should not do, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. And then we assign social meaning to these behaviors, right? That is, we take those behaviors and we often imbue the meaning into those behaviors. We imbue a set of moralities often into those behaviors, a set of ways of thinking about what's good and bad. So it's not merely what people do and don't do, but what they should do, what's moral to do, and whether people are good people or bad people based on that. So we're constructing meaning out of the behaviors, and that's a little bit abstract, but we'll try to sort of make it concrete as we go through some of these examples. Okay, so let's start with a particular example. That is the example of classroom behavior. Right? So all of you walked into the classroom on the very first day of class. Right? And for many of you, I wasn't even there at the time, and everyone knew exactly what to do. Right? Everyone was not, or no one was surprised when they walked in to see the rows of chairs and tables. Right? Everyone walked in and knew exactly what to do. So you knew exactly where you were supposed to sit. No one sat, for example, in what is very clearly the best seat in the entire room. That is my seat with a computer set up for you. I mean, everyone knew that was not where they were supposed to sit, that I was going to stand at the front, the professor would stand at the front, and that you would all sit in your seats out in the proverbial audience, if you will. No one sat on the floor. That is to say, everyone knew what to do when you walked in. And what's more, and perhaps even more interesting, is that everyone will usually in these kinds of classes at least, everyone sits in this same seat for the rest of the semester. You probably noticed that in your own, in your prior classes. I don't have a seating chart or a seating arrangement. You're free to sit wherever you like in the class. But most of you will, for the rest of the semester, sit in the exact same seat in which you sat in on the very first day. There's often some shuffling on the second day of class. We'll see how that plays out. But over time, everyone's going to have their own seat in that class. And you've noticed this as well in your other classes. Before this one, even without me telling you where to sit, you will tend to sit in the same spot over the rest of the semester. So let's think about some other patterns of behavior that we see in the classroom. Everyone knows to show up at 11 o'clock. Everyone knows to wait on me to start the class. You wait on the professor to say things, and once the professor gets going, starts talking, everyone else gets quiet. Students will sit and write at particular times, taking notes based on what I'm saying. Students know that they are supposed to raise their hand before they speak, right? So I have the liberty to start the class and continue talking. If you want to say something as a student, you're supposed to raise your hand, right? I can stop other students from talking. You can't stop me from talking, though you may want to at times. All right? And think about other situations in which you wouldn't find yourself doing that. No one sits down at the dinner table and raises their hand and tries to, before they speak to those that they're dining with, right? that's not a norm that governs behavior in that particular social setting, yet it is a norm that governs our behavior in this setting, right? So there's these patterns of behavior. Again, if you were an alien coming down, you would look into this classroom and you would say, this is very organized in a particular way, and it's organized because everyone knows what these particular norms are, right? We know that the professor starts the class. We know that students raise their hand before talking, right? We know that students are supposed to take notes while the professor speaks, right? We know that students are supposed to sit in a particular place in class while the professor stands up in the front of the room talking, right? So these are all norms that govern our behavior and tell us what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to act appropriately, and by which we will judge others whether or not they follow these norms. So this is where the kind of social meanings can take shape in the classrooms. Right, so think about what I make of different types of behavior that take place in the classroom. When I see students texting or talking in class, what kind of meaning do I create out of that? It makes me think that you don't really care about what's going on in the class, right? And think about the flip side of this. What does it mean to the professor when students are asking questions? It means that you care about the material, you care about the class, you're on top of things, right? When students sit in the very front of the class, this tells me that they're prepared and ready to go. When they bring their books every day to class, they ask questions, they take vigorous notes. This tells me that these students are students who are really engaged with the class, right? So I imbue a set of meanings about people through their behavior in the classroom, through following or not following particular norms. Right. You can even think about another thing. When you're in a given class and it becomes time to leave, right, and everyone starts to shut their books, even though the professor is still talking, people are shutting their books, they're putting things in their book bag. This is a signal, right? It provides a meaning. It's a signal that provides a set of meanings to me, the professor, that it's time for class to end, students are antsy and ready to go, right? Okay. So what you should see from that is that, again, the classroom is organized, our behavior in it is patterned, and it's patterned through a set of norms, and then we all imbue meaning into what's going on inside of the classroom based on what people are what people are doing, and how they're following norms. So let's talk about one more example, and then we'll talk about an example from the readings. So everyone's been to the doctor's office before, so think about the last time that you went to the doctor's office. You walk in, and this is essentially the scene that you see. And what do? Everyone essentially knows you're supposed to go up to the front counter and you sign your name in, right? And then you sit down in one of these chairs. Now, think about which chair you're going to sit in. Does anyone sit in the chair that's closest to the front counter where people are signing in? No, this is not where people sit, because it's going to invade someone else's personal space when they have to sign in. They're going to invade your space, you'll be invading their space, however you want to think about that. So people don't sit at that particular chair that's right next to the sign-in sheet. People will often move several chairs down. And think about, too, what happens when you walk in and someone's already sitting in a seat. Do you sit right next to them? No, most people will not sit right next to them, but will take an empty seat that's a couple of chairs down, again to provide their personal space. So we have rules governing this sort of simple set of interactions inside of a doctor's office, and these are kind of general rules about personal space that we have in the United States. And so we know where we're supposed to sit, we know what we're supposed to do when we walk into this room. That is, our behavior is patterned and ordered. And it's ordered because we know the norms of what people expect us to do when we walk in to the classroom. And so what happens when someone sits down right next to you in the doctor's office? Well, they either know you or they think they know you, right? You might sort of immediately give a set of meanings like, who is this person and do I know them from somewhere? Or maybe you would say they're not from the same society that I'm from, so they're the same culture that I'm from, so they don't know these particular norms and rules, right? So again, we make meaning out of people following and not following these norms. So the norms that we've just been talking about, the behaviors that we've just been talking about, are kind of mundane examples from our own everyday experiences in our own society. And it's useful to look at that, and I'm going to ask you to look at these norms in the future. I'm going to ask you to violate these norms in the future, which will be a lot of fun. But I think it's really important to look at other societies and other cultures when we think about the ways in which behavior is taking place and the ways that norms and kind of social meanings are shaping behavior in other places, because it's kind of interesting and fun to explain our own behavior this way, but oftentimes when we don't think in this kind of sociological way, we don't think about behavior that's really seems strange to us, right? When we look at other people's behavior, that can often seem weird or bizarre, and so we can make sense of the seemingly bizarre behavior by, I think, looking at these other cultures and other behaviors in other societies through this sociological lens, through these principles of human behavior. And so Harris gives us, I think, one particularly interesting example to think about, this guy Marvin Harris, who wrote about the sacred cow in India. So in India, he points out, and he goes through the kind of origins of this, the norms around cows in India, but he points out that cows are considered sacred in India, so sacred that even if an Indian was starving to death, they would be reluctant perhaps to eat a cow, and might, and in many cases, have simply avoided eating a cow that could have kept them alive. Cows are roaming the streets and roaming through markets in India, and no one is batting an eye at this, right? If a cow were to be roaming through our streets, or if you were to walk into a supermarket and see cows walking around in the front of the store, this would be bizarre. This would be, you wouldn't know what to do, but in markets in India, this is commonplace, at least outdoor markets, I should say. And cows are revered in such a way that they're seen as beautiful animals, so beautiful that they're paired alongside beautiful women in calendars, in kind of the way that these sort of pin-up calendars put cars next to beautiful women in our own society. Cows are often portrayed where we would see a car in our own society. So they're revered in this very special way. And he talks about that while we think of this as coming from the Hindu religion, it actually is actually not something that goes all the way back to the early Vedas, but really come from the erratic monsoon seasons of Indian agriculture. And so he spends a lot of his time talking about the origins of this, but I think it's really interesting for us to look at. This is a particular pattern of behavior, this relationship with the cow that we don't have in the U.S., right? That leads to a set of patterns of behavior, a set of norms that are governing life in India that seem strange to us. Right? And underneath that, a set of social meanings about the cow, where it's this sacred object, where we see it as a kind of object for tasty, nutritional meat. They see it as a very spiritual, sacred object. Right? And you may think to yourself, well, this is just kind of the weirdness of India or something like that. But you can think about the sacred animals that we have in our own society, right? So if you take a look at this cute furry little friend of ours, the cat, right? We consider this to be a pet. No one would ever consider eating one of these. And when we read news stories where restaurants get caught using things like cat meat or dog meat, we're just horrified at the thought of this. Yet in many places, cats serve the same role that cows serve in our own society. That is, that they are domesticated, tasty creatures to eat. Right? We look at a cow and we see a hamburger, a steak, and others might, in some societies, this is even true today in some parts of China still, the cat is looked at as a source of meat, whereas we look at it as a pet. And even many people in their own lives, if they were starving, would not kill and eat their own dog. Right? And so what I want you to see out of this is, again, the particular ways in which these norms arise and shape behavior, but also the social meanings that they then imbue in our lives. Right? So the meaning of a cow varies from one place to another. It's dependent upon the social context. In India, the cow is considered sacred. In the U.S., it's considered steak. Right? And you can take our own animals like the cat. In our own society, this is considered a pet, and in other societies, this is considered meat, right? And so think about those kind of comparisons to see the ways in which social context is shaping the meanings that we have about objects, and is shaping our understanding and even the emotions, and we'll get into some of this next time, the emotions that we have about particular animals. Okay, so what do we need to sort of, let's sort of begin to summarize a lot of what we see here. How can we think about this? Well, if you want to understand individual behavior, look at a particular social setting and find what is the pattern of behavior that individuals are engaged in that setting, right? Ask yourselves, okay, if we find this pattern of behavior, what are the social norms, the rules that underpin it, that are telling people what they should and should not be doing? And then what kinds of meanings do people create and attribute to behaviors? Both behaviors that violate the norms and also those that sort of fall in line with the norms, right? And this is a way to think about. I'm going to ask you in a few class periods to violate a social norm, and then and so you'll want to be able to identify that social norm by looking for the pattern of behavior, figuring out what is the rule that underpins it, and then what kinds of meanings do people attribute to the behavior. And you'll do that through violating that norm. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you do have your second writing assignment coming up that I want to mention to you. And this is what I'm going to ask you to do. You, again, remember that individual behavior happens in a social context, in a particular social situations. And so I thought it might be useful to have you all go into a very common social situation, that is eating with others. Right? And societies across the world have always had a variety of different norms that govern food and eating behaviors. And these things vary from society to society, and it's important to recognize that. But I want us to go into our own society and think about what kinds of norms underpin our own family dinner. So sit back and think about the typical family dinner in the U.S., and then identify as many norms as you can that are governing eating behavior. So think about what's happening in that setting, what are the behaviors taking place, and then think about what the norms are that are then underpinning those behaviors. Once you think about that and sort of create this image, this standardized image of the American family dinner in your head, I want you to actually sit down and write a description of the typical American family dinner, highlighting the mealtime norms and how it is that they're shaping individual behavior. So you're essentially going to be doing what you've read, and I want you to use the different pieces you read for today, where they are providing these kind of thick descriptions of of a particular social setting and a particular set of norms within that, right? And pattern your own writing after that. So just describe in as great a detail as you feel necessary what's going on. So to paint a picture, and in painting a picture, highlight the norms and how they're shaping individual behavior. And with that, I will see you all next Tuesday.